Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. It's time to get week 70 started with another Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, we've spent the first 3 weeks of this series diving into the caverns and chambers of Moria, as well as its history, etymology, and a lot more. Today, we begin another multi-episode look at the next place the company finds themselves, the Golden Wood of Lórien. Now, we'll start as the company heads that way after the fall of Gandalf in Moria. After Gimli took Frodo to see the Mirror and returned, the company then followed the road south and came across the spring that Gimli tells them is the source of the Silverlode. Aragorn then speaks, "Our road leads beside it for many miles, for I shall take you by the road that Gandalf chose. And first, I hope to come to the woods where the Silverlode flows into the great river, out yonder." They looked as he pointed, and before them they could see the stream leaping down to the trough of the valley, and then running on and away into the lower lands, until it was lost in a golden haze. "There lie the woods of Lothlórien," said Legolas. "That is the fairest of all the dwellings of my people. There are no trees like the trees of that land, for in the autumn their leaves fall not, but turn to gold. Not till the spring comes and the new green opens do they fall. And then the boughs are laden with yellow flowers, and the floor of the wood is golden, and golden is the roof, and its pillars are of silver, for the bark of the trees is smooth and gray. So still our songs in Mirkwood say." Well, it is a place of great beauty, especially now, filled with the Malorn that Galadriel has brought with her. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. As we often do on the TTT and the PPP, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start, after all. The Silmarillion, Chapter 3, of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor. There we read about the great journey of the Eldar towards the west. Several years into their journey, they encounter the Anduin and the Misty Mountains, described as taller and more terrible in those days. Then we read, "Then one arose in the host of Olwe, which was ever the hindmost on the road. Lenwe he was called. He forsook the westward march, and led away a numerous people southwards down the great river, and they passed out of the knowledge of their kin until long years were past. Those were the Nandor, and they became a people apart, unlike their kin, save that they loved water and dwelt most beside falls and running streams." Now, what became of those Nandor? Well, in the history of Galadriel and Celeborn in Unfinished Tales, we learned that after the Noldor had established Eregion in Second Age 750, like we talked about in Week 63's Middle-earth Map Monday, Galadriel, helped by her friendship with the dwarves in Khazad-dûm, had come into contact with the Nandarin realm of Lorinand on the other side of the Misty Mountains. This was peopled by those elves who forsook the great journey of the Eldar from Cuiviénen and settled in the woods of the Vale of Anduin. Now, at that time, the realm was larger than what it is we think of when we think of Third Age Lothlórien, when Aragorn and company arrive in Third Age 3019. The text here tells us that back then, it extended into the forests on both sides of the Great River, including the region where afterwards was Dol Guldur. Now, these Nandor elves lived a very chill life back then. We read, "These elves had no princes or rulers, and led their lives free of care, while all Morgoth's power was concentrated in the northwest of Middle-earth." Eventually, though, many Sindar and Noldor came to dwell among them, and their Sindarizing under the impact of Beleriandic culture began. Now, this bit about them being sort of the elvish libertarians, or maybe more like the anarcho-syndicalist commune from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, was a later addition, by the way. Christopher notes that the text, as originally written, stated that Lorinand was ruled by native princes, not people who took it in turns to be a sort of executive of the week. All right, now that's twice that we've seen it called Lorinand, which was apparently its name at the time the Nandor lived there. I want to take a brief aside and look at this name. Now, granted, we're probably going to have most of an episode set aside to deal with all the names that this place goes by, but this one has that Nandor history, so I want to look at it now. Christopher tells us about a note to the text that says Lorinand was the Nandarin name of this region and contained the Elvish word meaning golden light, valley of gold. The Quenya form would be Lorinande, the Sindarin Glornan or Nan Laur. But what's interesting about all this gold is that it's supposedly connected to the presence of the Malorn trees. As Christopher points out, but they were brought there by Galadriel. And in another later discussion, the name Lorinand is said to have been itself a transformation of a yet older name. Now, I'd say now we're getting somewhere, but maybe not. That older name, it turns out, was Lindorinand, Vale of the Land of the Singers. And now I think we are getting somewhere. Remember the elves that broke off the great journey, right? The relations of Olwe, then one arose in the host of Olwe? They were Teleri. Now, Christopher points out that there is here no doubt present the name by which the Teleri called themselves Lindar, the Singers. Now, the rest of the names, he says, are all likely due to Galadriel, and we'll come to those names either next week or the week after. Going back to the history of the place, though, the question remains, when did these Sindar and Noldor come among the Nandor and bring them into this Beleriandic culture? Was it only when Galadriel encountered them? Well, quite possibly. There's a bracketed statement from Christopher that says it's just not exactly clear when this migration took place, but one possibility he suggests is that they came from Eregion by way of Khazad-dûm and under the auspices of Galadriel. The problem, though, is that there is another essay about Amroth as the king of Lórien that's completely at odds with this. And here's just a quick aside that I need to tell you. Anytime you're looking at the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, it is often completely at odds with itself. As Christopher writes at the very beginning of the section, there is no part of the history of Middle-earth more full of problems than the story of Galadriel and Celeborn. And it must be admitted that there are severe inconsistencies embedded in the traditions. Much of those inconsistencies are related to Galadriel and Celeborn themselves, so we won't touch on those here very much, but we can't avoid this one. In that essay on Amroth, we read that they weren't Nandor elves, but Sylvan elves. The people of Lórien were even then, that is at the time of the loss of Amroth, much as they were at the end of the Third Age, Sylvan elves in origin, but ruled by princes of Sindarin descent, as was the realm of Thranduil in the northern parts of Mirkwood. They had, however, been much mingled with Noldor of Sindarin speech, who passed through Moria after the destruction of Eregion by Sauron in the year 1697 of the Second Age. Okay. Well, in this version, Celeborn goes there to fortify Lórien against any more attempts by Sauron to come across the Great River. Then when Sauron flees to Mordor, Celeborn got back with Galadriel, who was in Lindon at the time. Lórien then just did fine under its king Amdir until Sauron came back after the destruction of Númenor. That's when Amdir took an army to the Last Alliance, died, and his son Amroth became king. Greatly at variance, Christopher says. And by that he means the two simply cannot be reconciled. But it's this later version of the story with Amroth as king that we'll take a look at again next week in much more detail. For now, though, folks, that wraps it up for this week's Middle-earth Map Monday. But if you have a mailbag question that you'd like me to answer in Series 10, or maybe ideas for more Middle-earth Map Mondays, please email them to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Be sure to let Barliman know the questions are for today's Tolkien Times. As always, I'm grateful for the support of my patrons. You are the ones who make it possible for me to invest the time and resources into producing these episodes. So if you'd like to become a part of that, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to find out how you can join the TTT's Content Council and get a word on whatever it is I'm going to talk about next time. You also get a bonus episode every week, free merch, and more. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we learn more about the professor himself. Now, by now you've heard that soon the Prancing Pony Podcast will be back on YouTube, and that I'll be starting my new streaming show, the Prancing Pony Podcast Plays. Now, all of that is going to be combined in one place on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe here and tune in. Now, the name of this channel will change, but if you're already subscribed, you won't need to do a thing. Now, with all four of these projects going, I've decided I need to consolidate social media as well as YouTube. So be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.